The church erased reincarnation to keep you trapped. Here's the truth. 1. Banned by the church. Early Christians believed you lived many lives. In the luminous philosophical ferment of the first-century Mediterranean, the concept of reincarnation was neither obscure nor fringe. Rather, it was seamlessly integrated into early Christian contemplation. Envision the vibrant agora, not a stagnant relic of bygone eras, but a living crossroads where Jewish mystics, Stoic philosophers, and desert prophets conversed deeply with Athenian logicians. Within this radiant tumult of spiritual pursuit and intellectual rigor, early followers of Jesus earnestly explored the mysteries of the soul's perpetual journey across multiple lifetimes, weighing it with the same seriousness they brought to ritual purity in divine law. Origen of Alexandria, that towering theologian of antiquity, openly embraced the pre-existence and transmigration of souls, insisting that prophets had lived in previous epochs for the salvation of souls. His perspective was not idle musing, but a coherent cosmological framework guiding the soul's progression toward purification and wisdom. Similarly, Basilides, the Egyptian Christian visionary later branded a heretic by ecclesiastical authority, articulated a philosophy in which the human spirit traverses every form of flesh, experiencing manifold incarnations until it learns to embody fully the divine radiance from which it sprang. This was no static conception of existence, but a dynamic unfolding, an ongoing education of the soul through the gentle rhythms of embodied experience. Traveling eastward toward Edessa, Bardason, a philosopher, poet, and mystic, described the soul's journey through celestial realms poetically, likening its repeated incarnations to garments donned by travelers adapting to changing climates. Here, reincarnation became an eloquent expression of cosmic rhythm, the necessary cycles through which souls travel to achieve ultimate union with their divine origin. This perspective was not a deviation from true faith, but a natural philosophical insight derived directly from observing nature's cycles, the waxing and waning moon, seasonal transitions, and the perpetual death and rebirth of harvests. Why then should the soul remain frozen in a singular earthly existence when all of nature's wisdom speaks in cycles and returns? Repeated embodiment was simply a logical extension of the universe's inherent rhythm, a pedagogical necessity designed to gradually illuminate divine understanding. Yet this enlightened conception of the soul, fluid, cyclical, and expansive, would inevitably collide with the rigid confines of imperial orthodoxy. History teaches clearly that power moves swiftly, often faster than wisdom can record itself. By the 6th century, with Christianity fully ensconced within Roman imperial control, Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora orchestrated a political and theological consolidation aimed at reinforcing state authority through religious uniformity. Thus convened, the Second Council of Constantinople was less a dialogue among philosophers and theologians than a calculated imperial exercise in doctrinal conformity. In shadowed halls guarded by imperial soldiers, bishops solemnly declared as heretical the belief in the pre-existence of souls, a direct repudiation of reincarnation and related doctrines, now anathematized by imperial decree. No philosophers rose to debate this judgment. No ascetics brandished manuscripts in protest. The council's authority lay precisely in its political immediacy, disguised as theological certainty. Dogma was weaponized, not to pursue truth, but to bolster imperial dominion. The vibrant teachings of Syrian ascetics and Egyptian sages, once widespread and celebrated, were forcibly silenced beneath the crushing weight of authority. The imperial ruling class grasped a brutal truth. A population believing in multiple lifetimes and multiple chances beyond death could not easily be subjugated by fear of eternal damnation, by a singular, terrifying judgment demanding absolute obedience. This theological concept became a potent instrument of political control. In the ensuing centuries, ecclesiastical scribes under vigilant supervision systematically purged biblical manuscripts and codices of all references to reincarnation and soul preexistence. Texts once rich with poetic descriptions of the soul's journey through many lifetimes were physically erased from parchment with pumice stones, as though the ink itself were a dangerous heresy demanding eradication. To speak openly of reincarnation was no longer a mere philosophical stance, but a criminal act punishable by exile, imprisonment, or execution by fire. Thus, a spiritual compass, once guiding seekers toward cosmic understanding, became a forbidden map, hidden beneath threat of persecution. This organized erasure was far more than mere censorship. It represented a profound act of spiritual containment. Ecclesiastical guardians instinctively understood that hope threatens oppression, a populace confident that souls return to learn, correct errors, and evolve inherently resists a theology rooted in eternal fear, guilt, and submission. Reincarnation presented a narrative of liberation and moral accountability, extending far beyond one earthly life, a narrative incompatible with institutional demands for unwavering obedience. Consequently, what began as a philosophical and spiritual foundation within early Christianity was ruthlessly condemned, supplanted by a linear, terminal view of existence serving ecclesiastical and political agendas. The pre-existence of souls and the cycle of reincarnation were not buried due to lack of spiritual merit. They were erased because they challenged entrenched power structures. The cyclical soul journey, with its profound promise of hope and cosmic justice, was sacrificed at the altar of authoritarian control, reshaping Christian consciousness for centuries. This suppression reverberates even today, as contemporary seekers, intuitively sensing fragments of lost wisdom, struggle to reconcile institutional doctrines with the profound inner truth that life is a continuing voyage, endlessly unfolding beyond the confines of a single earthly incarnation. Second, reincarnation destroys the Church's biggest weapon: fear of hell. Fear, ancient and relentless, has always been the cornerstone upon which empires erect their dominion. It is a currency so potent that it needs neither physical chains nor visible sentinels to enforce its rule. From the iron fists of Rome's legions to the intricate metaphysics woven by medieval bishops, terror has functioned as the most efficient instrument of control. Central to this mechanism is the concept of eternal damnation, an endless hellfire burning throughout eternity, which transforms fear from a communal external force into an internalized prison. Under this doctrine, every conscience becomes its own jailer, each individual bearing invisible chains more effective than any forged from iron. The genius of this system lies precisely in its privatization of power. Each soul, isolated in the suffocating solitude of infinite punishment, becomes subject to relentless self-policing, forever haunted by the specter of a fiery abyss awaiting even the smallest transgression. Yet this meticulously constructed economy of dread finds its Achilles heel in the profound ancient doctrine of reincarnation. Reincarnation, with its revolutionary assertion that death is not a final terminus, but merely a transitional passage into another life, disrupts the very foundation of the Church's architecture of fear. It refuses the logic of irrevocable judgment, proposing instead a cosmic pedagogy wherein sin is no longer a terminal sentence, but rather a necessary trial, a lesson in the soul's progressive journey toward enlightenment. In this transformative vision, punishment is reshaped from eternal perdition into profound instruction. Sin becomes a process of refinement rather than relentless retribution. Consider, then, the revolutionary implications if such a doctrine were explained openly to the countless serfs and peasants whose relentless toil funded the soaring vaults of Gothic cathedrals, structures proclaiming the terror of eternal hell. Teaching these oppressed souls that each life represents merely one chapter among many, that moral failures can be revisited and rectified through future incarnations, would ignite embers of courage long extinguished by ecclesiastical dogma. The realization that the soul's journey transcends a single lifetime fosters a moral bravery fundamentally incompatible with a system predicated upon eternal torment. Peasants could risk defiance against corrupt lords and unjust clerics, confident that their soul's evolution continues beyond immediate suffering. Compassion would naturally blossom within this cyclical understanding of existence, for today's beggar might become tomorrow's sovereign, gradually eroding the rigid hierarchies established by birthright and privilege. Empathy, nurtured by the recognition of shared spiritual itinerancy, would eclipse inherited status, reshaping society at its core. Moreover, reincarnation disrupts the very economic model of salvation meticulously crafted by medieval church authorities. It undermines indulgences and dispensations, those lucrative toll booths where salvation was bought and sold through penance and almsgiving. If every new incarnation offers another chance to grow in wisdom and virtue, why would believers pay exorbitant sums to purchase absolution under the looming shadow of eternal flames? This doctrine threatens to dismantle the Church's monopoly on salvation, liberating believers from ecclesiastical control over their eternal destinies. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard poignantly described despair as the sickness unto death, a spiritual malaise that the Church recognized and expertly weaponized. By institutionalizing the fear of hell as doctrine, ecclesiastical power transformed existential despair into a potent mechanism of obedience and submission. The remedy for this existential anguish is precisely what reincarnation provides: a hopeful horizon. The anguished adolescent caught in the throes of despair, perhaps driven toward self-harm, would no longer be condemned to eternal flames, but invited instead to continue their soul's curriculum in another earthly existence. Likewise, the grieving mother, shattered by the loss of her infant, might find profound solace in the possibility that the child's essence will return, radiant and recognizable, in a future generation. Reincarnation offers a narrative that mitigates the sting of mortality, replacing bleak finality with hopeful continuity. Hell, by stark contrast, operates as a cosmic debtor's prison, an inescapable ledger of eternal punishment accruing interest, magnifying the gravity of every sin into unending torment. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that the Church's most influential theologians, from Augustine to Aquinas, dedicated themselves to crafting a moral theology predicated upon a single lifetime. Their ecclesiastical authority depended heavily upon their exclusive role as arbiters of post-mortem fate. They functioned as gatekeepers of salvation, offering finite pathways toward eternal reward or punishment, tightly controlling narratives defining the afterlife. To remove the fear of irrevocable torment, a fear fundamentally challenged by reincarnation, would dissolve ecclesiastical dominion as effortlessly as candle smoke dissipates at dawn. Stripped of the binding terror of eternal punishment, the Church's moral and political authority would confront an existential threat. Thus, reincarnation emerges not merely as a spiritual concept, but as a radical philosophical force, dismantling the Church's primary instrument of control, the fear of hell. It redefines death from a terminal condemnation to an opportunity for profound growth, offering humanity a hopeful alternative to existential despair. It erodes the foundations of hierarchical control, nurturing courage and compassion, and illuminating the transactional nature of salvation economies. The reintegration of reincarnation into public consciousness challenges the very architecture of spiritual authority built on fear, promising liberation of the soul and a renaissance of moral agency across lifetimes. 3. Leaked texts reveal Jesus taught reincarnation, and Rome covered it up. Hidden beneath layers of dust and centuries of enforced silence, fragments of early Christian thought challenging the official narrative now rise from forgotten caves and secret archives, casting unsettling light upon doctrines long revered as immutable truths. Among these recovered treasures, the Nag Hammadi codices, unearthed in the mid-20th century, stand prominently, containing the enigmatic Gospel of Thomas. Unlike canonical accounts, Thomas does not narrate Jesus' life linearly, but presents cryptic sayings that invite profound self-exploration. One such riddle states, "When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize you are the children of the living Father." This wisdom resonates closely with reincarnation's philosophical foundation, which views the soul's journey as an unfolding across multiple lives, peeling away illusions layer by layer. Furthermore, even the canonical Gospel of Matthew alludes enigmatically to reincarnation when Jesus identifies John the Baptist as Elijah. "Come again." Here lies subtle yet potent evidence suggesting a continuity of soul, a cycle of rebirth transcending singular existence. Such hints gain clarity in the secret gospel of the Hebrews, referenced by the early church father Saint Jerome, yet deliberately erased from collective Christian memory, in which Jesus assures a disciple he will clothe thee in another form, explicitly implying cycles of death and rebirth. Further enriching this spiritual tapestry is the second-century mystical text Pistis Sophia, cherished by ascetics wandering the deserts of Egypt and Syria. It vividly depicts the soul's arduous ascent through celestial spheres, undergoing trials and purifications until achieving sufficient purity to return to earth as light. This metaphor captures reincarnation's essential promise: spiritual renewal and evolution. Such writings, abundant in the language of cyclical existence and cosmic return, did not vanish by mere neglect or happenstance. Rather, their suppression reflects a deliberate effort by institutional forces determined to monopolize the narrative of salvation. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215, convened amidst the political complexities of crusades and clerical reform, issued a terse canon prohibiting the reading of apocryphal texts without episcopal authorization. Under the guise of ecclesiastical order, this decree sealed the fate of numerous writings, particularly those that endorsed reincarnation or cyclical rebirth. The machinery of suppression intensified ruthlessly during the Inquisition, when precious manuscripts and Coptic scrolls were seized and immolated alongside mystics branded as heretics for deviating from sanctioned doctrine. Authentication of sacred texts became a gatekeeping mechanism, ensuring only doctrines reinforcing a singular life and final judgment paradigm were transmitted through generations. Centuries later, even within the Vatican's carefully guarded archives, the shadow of censorship persisted. In the 19th century, a diligent monk cataloging ancient manuscripts discovered troubling passages in Origen's commentary on Romans Book 6. Here, resurrection was depicted not as mere bodily revival, but as profound transformation of those things which are subject to corruption. Marginal instructions, boldly inked in red, explicitly directed scribes to excise these passages before further dissemination, underscoring the Church's anxiety over teachings, hinting at a more nuanced, cyclical understanding of life and afterlife. Even into the 20th century, secrecy endured. The suppressed diaries of Father Emmanuel Malingo reveal a tantalizing claim. Pope Pius XII, notorious for his rigid theological oversight, allegedly ordered the removal of references to cyclic rebirth from the Syriac sermons of Ephraim the Syrian, one of Christianity's most esteemed early theologians and hymnographers. Such deletions, performed under the auspices of doctrinal purity, illustrate a consistent pattern of deliberate obfuscation and theological sanitization extending through the centuries. Recently, anonymous archivists leaked microfilm images of a 10th century palimpsest, a manuscript whose original Greek text had been scraped away to accommodate a medieval homily. Beneath these layers emerges a startling dialogue attributed to Jesus, stating profoundly, "Souls pass like seeds through generations until they ripen into love." This evocative metaphor encapsulates reincarnation's essential principle, that spiritual maturation unfolds progressively across lifetimes, an insight systematically censored and buried beneath ecclesiastical rewrites. What these revelations create is a philosophical and historical crime scene, impossible to dismiss. Rome's custodians of orthodoxy have long cultivated Christ's teachings like meticulous gardeners, pruning every doctrinal branch threatening the carefully sculpted theology of a single life salvation. Orthodoxy, thus revealed, is not a pristine apostolic inheritance, but a retrospective editorial project, a redaction shaped as much by imperial ambitions as by genuine spiritual inquiry. Such selective editing aimed explicitly to consolidate ecclesiastical power, reinforce imperial social orders, and suppress theological frameworks that might encourage individual spiritual autonomy or challenge the Church's exclusive authority over salvation. Therefore, these leaked texts do more than merely challenge established dogma. They unveil the structural underpinnings of religious authority itself, exposing the Church's historical role not as an impartial guardian of divine truths, but as an active manipulator of spiritual narratives, tailored specifically to serve earthly dominion. The erased doctrine of reincarnation, hidden in the shadows for centuries, compels us to reconsider the roots of Christian spirituality and the complex interplay between faith, truth, and institutional power. To reclaim reincarnation today is to embark upon a journey of rediscovering an authentic vision of the soul's destiny, one embracing growth, multiple lives, and ultimate reunion with the divine, liberated from the confines of fear-driven dogma. 4. You were never supposed to be afraid of death. That was their trap. From the dawn of philosophical inquiry to the existential meditations of contemporary thought, death has been perceived not simply as an ending, but as the profound paradox that grants life its urgency and meaning. Plato's dialogues eloquently portray the soul's immortality, while Heidegger's analysis of being toward death frames mortality as the horizon that defines our finite existence. Both philosophers see death as a catalyst for authentic living. Yet when religion becomes an instrument of empire and institutional dominance, this existential urgency is often distorted into pervasive panic, a tool for psychological control rather than spiritual liberation. Imagine the shadowy vastness of a medieval cathedral, its frescoed walls depicting tortured souls twisting beneath flickering candlelight. Hear the homilist's voice booming about eternal judgment as parishioners clutch rosaries like fragile lifelines against eternal damnation. Such spectacles succeed precisely because they portray death as an irrevocable trial, an abyss from which there is no return, trapping souls in perpetual anxiety. In sharp contrast, the doctrine of reincarnation offers an entirely different vision, transforming death from a precipice into a gentle bend in the eternal river of existence. In this view, death is not cessation, but transition, a swift yet fluid turn toward broader horizons of experience and spiritual growth. Ralph Waldo Emerson beautifully encapsulated this notion as a melting of the chain of causes, an unbinding of linear constraints that releases the soul into new forms, new opportunities for awakening. The Bhagavad Gita, revered for millennia, describes death simply as a change of clothes, demystifying mortality by underscoring its inherent naturalness. Similarly, suppressed Christian mystics, those silenced voices censored by ecclesiastical decree, depicted the soul as a pilgrim ascending Jacob's ladder, resting and climbing successively, each rung representing lessons in humility, wisdom, and love. Such cosmology breeds fearless ethics. Imagine a society taught that destinies unfold across multiple lifetimes, that actions resonate beyond the immediate present, and that injustice echoes through cycles of rebirth. Such a people might courageously confront systemic oppression, confident their souls participate in an ongoing moral and spiritual education, rather than confined within one fleeting existence. Moreover, reincarnation's implications reach beyond ethics into environmental and social responsibility. The awareness that one's consciousness, or that of beloved others, will return to inhabit this world again, fosters profound stewardship of resources and relationships. Mortality, thus reframed, becomes a mentor rather than an executioner. Grief acquires new contours. The departed grandmother might manifest again as the newborn neighbor, her eyes bright with familiar recognition. The child lost tragically in miscarriage could return as a cherished friend of future generations, weaving an enduring spiritual fabric across lifetimes. Gravestone's harsh finality softens into the gentle rhythm of seasonal renewal, eternal returns, and cyclical continuity. This empowering and radical vision explains precisely why clerical hierarchies have historically dismissed and suppressed reincarnation. A populace liberated from fear, unafraid of death, and the judgment allegedly awaiting beyond, is inherently less susceptible to manipulation through threats of punishment or promises of reward. Without terror of hellfire or longing for conditional celestial bliss, institutional authority loses its grip over the souls it seeks to govern. Thus, reclaiming reincarnation constitutes an act of profound spiritual emancipation. It affirms that the soul answers not to ecclesiastical decrees or dogmatic mandates, but to a law far older and deeper, the law of return, karmic justice, and progressive learning until love reaches perfection. No institution or hierarchical authority can reduce this cosmic curriculum to finite judgments or condense infinite cycles of growth into a single verdict. The historical trap binding humanity has always been fear, manufactured dread of death as annihilation or eternal torment. Paradoxically, liberation lies in memory, remembering who we were in previous existences, who we will become in future incarnations, and who we already are beneath every earthly guise. Immortal sparks of the divine, cycling through time, destined to awaken fully as the universe itself expands in consciousness. Across the broad canvas of human history emerges a clear pattern, marked consistently by suppression, intimidation, forgery, and fear. Each attempt to erase reincarnation's truths leaves faint but indelible traces in ancient manuscripts, whispered dissent, censored writings, and fear-clouding collective memory. Yet when fear is confronted directly, it dissipates, and each act of suppression inevitably invites revelation. The Church erased reincarnation not because it represented fringe fantasy or heretical aberration, but precisely because it articulated a liberating philosophy of the soul, one empowering rather than imprisoning, embracing growth rather than finality, freedom rather than subjugation. In recent decades, long-hidden manuscripts have resurfaced, scholars have translated once forbidden texts, mystics now speak openly, and ordinary individuals increasingly remember intuitive glimpses of previous lives, memories history's official narrative deliberately failed to teach. The veil of suppression is thinning. The human spirit, no longer constrained within the narrow confines of one lifetime, emerges as a traveler on an expansive road offering infinite horizons. This path belongs to those courageous enough to recall the journeys etched upon their hearts and souls, journeys transcending time, space, and illusions of finality imposed by fearful doctrines.